and women coming together. And as I said downstairs, please pass the word. Would appreciate it. And this is Pam. She's our speaker for today. And I have no idea what she's going to be talking about. Other than a little bit. A little bit, yes. So I want to ask her, now, did you bring anything to pass out at all about you? No?
No, however, if you're interested in participating in any upcoming Untitled public events and classes and things of such, if you're interested in anything at all, you can also be put on my email list, so you can write your name and your email address, and I send out on occasion upcoming classes and public retreats and incentives and
Okay, before you go on, then I'm going to let Pam take over, and I want you to know that my beautiful grandson is here.
Oh.
Jonathan, and he's here to help his mother.
he's a computer guy, so.
Pam
is here to help her mother.
Yeah, Pam is my daughter, for any of you that may not know that. And I'm very proud of her for what she's been doing. So, but she's learned it all from me. And with that, I will turn it over to Pam. You can introduce yourself and take it from there.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. Okay, well, I'm glad you're all here on this beautiful Saturday morning. I have a question to ask you guys. I'm going to start out with asking you, how many of you know your ancestry? How many of you dug deep into it, going into your lineage? Okay. How many of you done like the Ancestry DNA test? Okay. Okay. Do you guys have a curiosity about your ancestry, your heritage?
Oh, sure.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And why do you think that is? What do you think some of the reasons are behind that?
Because we missed all the stories that nobody told us.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't know. Past my great-grandmother, I know nothing.
Yeah. Right. Right. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at today, and I'd like to have open dialogue. I'm the type of individual where I don't like it where I'm sitting up here and just regurgitating information from somebody else. I always like to hear feedback and make this, you know, an engagement type of opportunity for all of us. Because I love stories, and I love to hear stories. Now, my honey bunny and I last night, we went out to eat. And this is the second time we ran into these 4 women, 3 women and then 4 women. And they were sharing their old stories. And then so we go back to some earlier days that he and I, you know, when we were younger, and you run into somebody that you never thought you would ever run into that lived in a similar area that you lived in, that worked in a similar area that, you know, where you worked, and you get to talking, and it's really nice talking to that person because then they become a person. And then you're sharing these stories, and that's how you connect. So I think that's something that have forgotten today, are these stories, the storytelling. And it's so important that we sit down with each other and share stories. And boy, do I got some good ones with Levon, my mom's cousin, going back on an airplane. You know, oh my gosh, we got some funny stories. You know? So today, mythology and storytelling, what that does is it helps us to understand ourselves better. And not only that, it brings meaning to life. And to me, knowing the history of our ancestors tells me that's who we are. And so then that way we can understand ourselves better. So we'll get a little bit deeper into that. I've got like 8 slides up there I'm going to show, and I like to just bounce off of that slide, so then you'll see why. So, okay, Jonathan, if you could turn ahead. Okay. guys familiar what that's all about? Anybody? Yeah? You want to say where that came from?
It's from Outlander. I've watched the whole series, but I never
Yeah.
quite, it just was always beautiful. I loved the beginning
Yeah.
where they showed, before each one, they showed a little clip of that.
Yeah. So how many here have seen the movie Outlander? Okay, okay. It's a series, it's got 6 seasons. They just entered the 6th season. And it's basically a love story, but a lot of it comes from this woman that wrote novels, these books. And they became very popular, so they made a movie out of it. But a lot of it is based on Scottish heritage. And so here in the next slide here, so Outlander is full of references to many Highland myths, symbols, and superstitions passed down over generations of the Celtic people, the artifacts, and the drama. The Facts and Fantasy series brings history to life, as you can see in their dancing. And so the ancient Celts were a widespread group of tribes whose rich culture has been identified through burial artifacts and language. So we connect with that. Those stones there, can you go back, Jonathan, to those stones, that picture? They're stones, those are druids, they're dancing. They come from an older tribe or Germanic tribe in the United Kingdom. Some of them are known as pagans, but they're druids. And what they're doing back then, you gotta remember this is over 200 years ago, they're honoring the dead. And that's where Halloween actually came from, to honor the dead. So, and they, again, it was a celebrity, they celebrated that. So, okay, so you can step ahead. One more. Okay, so the dream, the journey, the arrival. So together we tell a story. How many here have had relatives come into Ellis Island that you're familiar about? Okay. And have you done any research online in regard to that, or been to Ellis Island? To look
Been there,
at?
looked it up. It was
Yeah.
fun to see the names.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah, yeah.
And right there's a picture of the people that, they came here on the ship, or ships, 2 or 3 ships. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Jonathan. This is an actual ship that my great-grandpa, Mom, you can help me out with this, Paul Wallner came in on. And he came from Austria. And he had to go through Antwerp in Belgium. And this is where the ship pulled out of. They've got a website that's devoted to the ships that used to transport, the groups of people that came over here. And so what they did, our ancestors, every single one of us, is called transgenerational inheritance. So what they brought with them also is not only, their belongings, but they also brought their traits, they brought their patterns, they brought their genetics, they brought information, because back then people lived with the land, they lived off the land, they were much more connected with the land. They lived in nature. Today, we live in concrete buildings. We live in 4 walls. And if you look at the bigger cities, there's high rises. They live, up on the 50th floor. So back then, they lived with the land because the land spoke to them. And so they brought back all those stories, which are depicted in mythology and myths. And before we have science, they didn't understand. So if you're going back before science, a lot of our forefathers, a lot of our ancestors, they created the gods and the goddesses in all these different cultures, but they also were indigenous. So they more or less, like the Native Americans, lived off the land. But then, the Romans started coming in, the Saxons started coming in, and that's where all the fighting started coming from too. And there's been generational wars over the years. So they also bring over their genetics of what's called historical trauma. And in my research, and now we're finding more and more of this through epigenetics, is we inherit that. It's part of our DNA, which I find fascinating. So again, he came in on that ship, and he brought with him everything I'm talking about. So that's the actual ship. So if you want to turn, and again, like I'm talking about, our adventure begins when we're born, but it also through our DNA, again, is handed down genetically and also through epigenetics. So, but we learn about each other and others' cultures how. There was a day you didn't have a phone. There was a day you didn't have the internet. So what did we do? We did a lot of reading. But before that, it was also oral. It wasn't before even written. We started out with symbols, and then we jumped into oral. If you look in the caves, you know, you've got those cave paintings way, way, way back, you know, prehistoric times. And it was all symbols, you know, and then we became oral, and we handed that down. Now, it is said the Irish, at least the Irish in Ireland, they wrote, they scribed. They had scribe people that came in and wrote down a lot of information. There's what's called the Book of Kells. It's being held in the university over in Ireland. If you go online, you can look up Book of Kells. Very colorful. Just amazing work that they did. It took them like 10 years to write that book. But how we translate our lives, you know, on paper is through books, but we do it also through mythology, you know, like I'm talking about there, your legends are handed down, religions, how are those handed down? The Bible, this is where Aubrey would know the history. The Bible isn't just one book, it's an accumulation of the Genesis, and then, you know, after the Genesis, accumulation of all these different books, you know, that came together. And you know how many religions are out there? Oh my God, there's world's living religions. There's people that put their head in the hole and they go upside down and they got their feet going up to the, it's just amazing. There's women that they'll put cloths over their face so they don't breathe in microorganisms because they don't want to kill anything. That's going way out there, you know? So all these different religions. You know, we've got these rituals, you know, we've got these dreams, again, poetry, you know, we've got this enchantment. You know, the fairy tales. How many of you are familiar with a lot of dramatic fairy tales? You know, you've also got like, well, you got Cinderella. We used to sing the songs. My mother used to read to us all the time. These fairy tales, you know, Beauty and the Beast, or Cinderella, or the Grimm's Tales, you name it. They're just endless. So, and we got written, we got singing. And there's something about singing. When we sing, we're singing together. We feel connected. We belong. And so my philosophy is, because we were all colonized, a lot of us moved over here, I should say our ancestors. They left their culture, they left their rituals, they left their mores, they left their ways of living. And the elders were the ones that were the teachers, because they handed down the wisdom. They helped the children grow and learn about themselves. You know, the males were initiated in certain ways, the women were initiated in certain ways. There's tribes out there, even like in South America, I don't know if they do it still to this day, but there's certain tribes where the young boy becomes, when he starts to, the puberty starts in, and he becomes a young man, they put vines on the bottom of his ankles, and they have them jump off of like this high scaffolding. And then he jumped to the point where his head is just, it lands here. It doesn't hit the ground. But they jump off head first. And that's like an initiation. And that's something we don't do in our cultures anymore. It's very, very little. And if you look at the farmers, the farming industries, we used to have the parents that lived together with the family, and we helped each other out, you know? And so now, a lot of the kids, you know, a couple of prior generations, not even that long ago, we've all become dispersed. You know, so there's the elderly now, they get pushed aside because their kids are all over, who knows, God's creation. and we've lost that connection. So that's why I think mythology now has become much more popular, because we want to know where do we belong, where. Why a lot of people today too, why you see a lot of the English movies out, you see a lot of the Renaissance movies out, you see a lot of period movies out, is because who are we? So we want to go back to something familiar. People say we want to go back to normal. Well, we're never going to go back to normal. So because of the World Wide Web and all this other stuff that's not going on. But this is where we can start to create our own communities, you know, even on the land that we're living on now, which is so important. So you still can bring in, you know, and create your own cultures and your own communities, and that's what we need to do. So if you want to turn aside. Oh, and music. Oh, love music. So, how many of you have ever asked the question, who am I? What is my identity? Where am I from? What is my ancestry? What are their customs? What are their beliefs? And then what are your beliefs? You know, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And when you ask these questions, these are questions that open us up to new questions, which leads us deeper into the mystery of existence. You know, there's always this mystery. Why are we here? Who am I? Where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And so many more questions like that. So if you want to turn the slide, please. How many of you are familiar with the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung? Okay. Yeah. Well, he was quite the guy in his day. High IQ, but also a very deep philosophy, intellect, you name it. But he said one of the most important questions anyone can ask is, what myth am I living? And the reason he said that is because he believed that myths and dreams were expressions of the collective unconscious, in that they express core ideas that are part of the human species as a whole. In other words, myths express wisdom that has been encoded in all humans, perhaps by means of evolution or through some spiritual process. So do you guys believe that? That we're encoded with like that DNA? That a lot of the beliefs, a lot of what they lived through is handed down generation to generation to generation. I believe that now. Back then, I never even knew enough to ask the question. You know, until you get older, you start asking more and more questions. So, we can turn the slide, please, Jonathan. So what is the myth we're living? That was the question he asked. Let's just read through this quickly. Besides the obvious personal sources, creative fantasy also draws upon the forgotten and long-buried primitive mind with its host of images, which are to be found in the mythology to all ages and all peoples. The sum of these images constitutes the collective unconsciousness, a heritage which is potentially present in every individual. It is the psychic correlate of the differentiation of the human brain. I was driven to ask myself in all seriousness, what is the myth you are living? I found no answer to this question and had to admit that I was not living with a myth or even in a myth, but rather in an uncertain cloud of theoretical possibilities, which I was beginning to regard in with increasing distrust. I did not know that I was living a myth, and even if I had known it, I would not have known what sort of myth was ordering my life without my knowledge. And so I think we do that in our teens is when it starts, after you're a child, beyond adolescence. So in the most natural way, I took it upon myself to get to know my myth, and I regarded this as the task of tasks. I simply had to know what unconscious or preconscious myth was forming me from what Roseau means like network or roots, spring. This resolve led me to devote my years of my life to investigating the subject contents, which are the products of unconscious processes, and to work out methods which would enable us, or at any rate help us, to explore the manifestations of the unconscious. So, A lot of information in there, but what that boils down to again is there's the unconscious and there's the conscious and there's the collective whole, which a lot of us are familiar with, right? So there's that collective unconscious that we all live in. And that's what's going on now. There's so much going on in this world, but it's what we bring in, and it's a collective unconscious that's also handed down to us from our past, our ancestry. So I hope this is all starting to make sense, okay? Because the brain, the conscious, the prefrontal cortex, that's used for processing and language. Right now I'm thinking with my brain, but most of the information in me is all in my entire system. So if you look at Freud and you follow his work, he's got that iceberg, where the tip of the iceberg is above the level of the ocean, which is only about this high up. But underneath is all the water, and then that's where the bottom piece of the iceberg goes all deep, deep, deep down. That's our subconscious. And that's where the majority of our information lies. We have the brain just to process, to communicate, to live. And they say the only other animals that really have that consciousness are like the whale and the dolphin, and is it a raven? There's one other animal.
Gorilla.
Is it the gorilla, the primates? Because they can look in a mirror. Yeah.
Yeah, gorillas can, chimps can. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we, through evolution, our brains continuously change too. So, yeah, so much information out there now because of the World Wide Web. So sometimes you just got to reel it back in, and it can just become too much. But what I found is what you know within yourself, that's the truth. And that's what we're always looking for, is the truth. And you can't go wrong with that. So, okay, you can turn aside. So, what is the myth you're living? Understanding yourself. So something like this now, I'm going to be holding a workshop, and I'm working with Dan Huber. He's a colleague of mine. He's a psychotherapist. He's referred to also as a shaman. He and I have been working together over the years, and together we're going to be putting together like Ancestry renewal, where you go back into your ancestry. And you can be curious about what are some of the traits that you have that are handed down into you, all the way to if you want to release some old historical trauma. And something that happened with me quickly, and then I'd like to dialogue more with you guys. A real quick story about myself is, like my mother said, I learned a lot from her. I wonder where that comes from, right? So, but something that was always in me is I always wanted to know, who am I, what am I all about? And I became interested in Native Americans and the way they live. And one day I worked at Acuity Insurance, and I would every once in a while pop on the computer because my whole brain just couldn't concentrate on that screen all day long and settling bodily injury cases. So one day I was on the internet perusing, not even looking for anything, and here was an ad. Chief Philip Whiteman Jr., Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, in Door County, horse trainer, and he's going to show X, Y, Z, and my light bulb went off, and that called me in. So I went to the event, and oh my gosh, did my world open up. Learning about the Native American culture and ways of working with horses. There's nothing like it. It's just so different. And again, it's coming from a different perspective in his lineage and ways of working with animals. Animals are, they don't have a name. Dogs, cats, horses, they don't have a name. They're just relatives. They're all our relatives. And so you learn stuff like that. Well, for 5 years I went to see him there. He would come there, and then I'd go and see him in Madison and a couple other places. And then we would also sit in sweat lodges. So my doors just opened up to understanding another culture and what they're all about. And that was their culture. Now, my culture was not Native American. It came from a different type of culture. And I can't help but wonder, that's why I had some curiosities, why I was drawn, let's say, to mountains, or I'm drawn to water, or I'm drawn to rivers, or I'm drawn to a specific type of art, or I'm drawn to a specific type of titles in a book, or even a specific type of movies that I'm interested in. So think about that with yourselves. And that's what this workshop is going to be, is there's a curiosity that we have within us, and what is that curiosity all about? But it helps you identify with who you really are, not what society wants you to be, or somebody else. So that's that, short and simple. Yeah. You guys have any questions, anything you want to add? What are your thoughts you're having? What are the thoughts are you having?
I remember when you had your teepee, and then you painted the horse,
Yeah.
and you let us all down to the teepee with your horse, and then we lit a fire, and you would lay on the floor and connect with the earth, but also we would imagine what was going on at the top of your teepee. That was so great.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You
Was that with me, or also me and Dan Huber, or?
You had a shaman come from Milwaukee. I forgot what his name was.
Probably was Dan Huber.
Yeah, he would shake his rattle.
That was Dan.
Yeah,
Dan
yeah.
Huber. Yeah, yeah. So
You
he
still have your
brings.
teepee out there?
Huh?
You still have your teepee out
Yeah.
there?
Mhm. Yeah, but before COVID hit,
Yeah.
we couldn't have any gatherings, so.
Right.
Why don't you tell them a little something what you do? I mean, this is part of what you do.
Well, this is part of what I do. Oh my gosh. Well, where do I start? Well,
The
okay.
business cards here if you want to hand some out.
Huh?
The business cards do a pretty good job of explaining what you do.
Yeah.
You want those?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
If
hand
you're
them out,
interested.
Jonathan. Well, anyway, I worked at Acuity Insurance for 13 years. I was a property and casualty adjuster. But you know how you have that restlessness feel in you? It's like, this ain't quite what I want to be doing the rest of my life, you know? It was fine, I made a living, but there still was something missing. And then one day, I was cruising the internet, and this wasn't even something that was out there. So, thank you. I wasn't even out there even knowing that this was out there, because it wasn't out there. It was like at the blind, I was walking in a dark room. Well, I came across Prescott College because they work with horses, and I thought, oh, working with horses, what is that all about? Because I always say horses are in my blood, which I think is handed down through the DNA throughout the generations. And so I saw Prescott College, they advertised a master's degree in counseling psychology, but then the concentration was in equine-assisted mental health and learning. And that rang my bell. And I called the phone, and I remember it was only a couple days later. I said, Mom, I want to go to school. She goes, okay. So then I enrolled in the college, and about 3 years later, I got my master's. And then that's when everything started changing. So I still worked in the corporate world, and then I started my private practice on the side where I was counseling and coaching individuals. And then I learned the skill set. I basically learned the skill set on my own, but I also traveled the United States learning from other early pioneers. How does that work? You have a person, you have a horse, you put them together. What do they get out of that? What is that all about? People are so used to riding, but it's got nothing to do with riding, because it's not about the horse. It's about helping people find themselves, understand themselves, overcome fear and self-doubt. And then some of my mom's friends were the guinea pigs for that. I remember they came up, which was so helpful, because this is so new, and I'm an early pioneer, so I call it like the blind leading the blind. What is the skill set? How does this work? So then you learn on my own, and then I started bringing in stuff that I believed in, and then I created my own private practice. And then I started seeing clients, and you name it, I worked with it all. Foster care, domestic abuse, suicidal ideation, Asperger's, you know, perpetrators. My mom worked with us too, worked with me. And I just loved it because I was outside in nature with the horses and helping people. And there is something so rewarding about helping people because it helps you get out of yourself, and it helps you open your eyes to the pain and the struggles that other people out there live through or have gone through. And I can tell you one thing, there's nobody anywhere that has not had some kind of pain or something in their closet that they're skeletons. Nobody, you know. So then I started having people approach me, hey, I'd like to do what you're doing. And I thought, oh, okay. So I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is start teaching others. And that's when I started the Equine Assisted Coaching Association. So now today I train students all around the world that same skill set, so they can go and help their clients or whoever they want to work with. And you bring horses in, you do it outside in nature, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, there's so much more. Yeah. So I've been living a very interesting life. I'm not a traditionalist. I'm not a follower. One thing I've learned. I love to experience life and not just sit on a chair in front of a TV. So try not to, but then COVID hit. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I find it interesting that you're bringing stories and mythology because in the past 3 weeks, that's what I've been speaking with, but in relation to the Bible is just stories, and then you just read them. But if you immerse yourself in the story and become each one of the people, then you begin to understand more about yourself.
Yes.
So if there's dissension between two people in a biblical story, if you're this person, what's your perception? And if you're this person, what is your perception?
Yeah.
So we've been delving into that, and of course Palm Sunday and Easter will be the end of this 5-week thing that I've been doing. So when I saw that, I went, oh my God, there's no such thing as a coincidence in universe. So thank you.
That's a collective.
Yeah.
Unconsciousness.
The collective consciousness.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And as I always tell people, ask questions of everybody who's alive and get more stories.
Yeah. And in the Bible too, if you look at a lot of the scriptures psychologically, if you look at it from that type of perspective, it gives a different meaning to, and I think people relate more then, because then, like you said, when you put it in story, then people can relate.
Right.
I see myself in there,
So
That's
thank you.
cool, yeah. I heard a quote the other day. It was something about, and I don't want to put churches down, but they said when people go to church, they sit and listen, and they talk about God. And then they said, but the Native Americans, what they do is they talk to God.
Absolutely. Right. You're right.
So, but that's why their dances, the Native